Hi, everyone. Welcome to the India Games Market Bootcamp, and welcome to my presentation about the Indian games market and ecosystem. I'm Tom Wijman from Newzoo. Today I'll be sharing some key stats, forecasts, and unique characteristics of the Indian games market. Thanks for attending. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you have a very great afternoon with my presentation, but definitely everyone that comes after me. Looking to be a great lineup, so I'm very excited, and I'll be listening in as well. Before I dive into those stats, please allow me a minute to introduce Newzoo and to introduce who I am and why I am presenting this to you today. Newzoo is the world leader for market intelligence and research on the games and esports markets. We're a specialized firm. We help some of the largest brands, entertainment, game publishers, technology companies to strategize around games and esports in three ways. So we do market sizing and forecasting, where we'll be pulling a lot of data from today. We do direct consumer research in 32 countries, among which India. We've done this consumer research since 2009, and we added India to our portfolio in 2017. So I'm also pulling from 4 years of direct consumer data today. And finally, we use tracking data. So we have a lot of partners that use device data, playing data, how people are behaving around games, playtime, what games they are playing across PC, console, and mobile. Why me? I've been the lead for our games market research since 2017, 4 years. I also lived in Bangalore for the past 2 years, well, from 2018 until June 2020, where I sadly had to move back because of the pandemic. I would far from claim to be the most knowledgeable person on the Indian market that you'll see today, but hey, I'm luckily enough backed up by a lot of statistics. So looking forward to share this with you today. So some of the things on the agenda today, first of all, I'll share some numbers, kind of have to being my Newzoo background. I'll share our forecasts, some of our forecasts as well, what makes the Indian market so interesting and why so many people are interested in investing or succeeding on the Indian market. I'll share some overview of the Indian gamer, who they are, some demographics, preferences, again, what makes the Indian gamer unique. You'll often find that throughout the presentation, I'll be comparing it to the global average or to some other countries. Just because I think that helps put things into perspective. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll share some unique characteristics and pitfalls that we see for India and that shape our forecast, and then look ahead a little bit. At the end of the session, we'll do a live Q&A, which I'm looking forward to as well. So hopefully you receive some great questions. Moving on then to the games market in India in 2020. And I think straight from the bat, you see why India is such a unique market. India is, in 2020, the total games market was 2.3 billion and mobile made 95% of that total. PC being 4% and the remaining just 1% being console. And to put this in perspective immediately of globally, the market was 175 billion in 2020, and mobile is still the dominant platform. 49% of revenues were generated through mobile in 2020 globally, with the remaining 50% being split roughly 30% console and 20% PC. So India is what we would call a mobile first market, and you see it in the growth rate as well, that it is a very strong growing market. So the overall market grew 48% year on year in 2020. Yes, part of that is due to the lockdowns that were the result of the pandemic. But in India specifically, and in many emerging markets as well, a lot of that growth is just through people discovering games, people coming to the internet, people getting more opportunities to spend, getting the technology needed to be able to spend. So those are far stronger drivers for growth, and those are what drove growth in India last year. And what I did as well is put some of the why India is such an interesting market in a global perspective. So looking on the right, 92% of those revenues were generated on a smartphone, with just 3% being on tablet of the total 2.1 billion for mobile. But far more interesting, I think, and what makes India so promising is the size of the player and the online population as well. So 649 million online population is number 2 globally, just behind China. Similar for players, 312 players, again, number 2 globally, and 84 million payers. So those are people that pay to play games, is the number 3. There is something to be said about the share of payers to total players, which is really rather low compared to global. And that's, again, one of the challenges for India. But just to see that sheer number of players is what makes India so interesting. Moving then to what we forecast, because again, what you'll probably see immediately from this slide or pick up immediately from this slide is that we are very optimistic on what it can be. growing from 2.3 billion in 2020 to 4.8 billion in 2023, which by then India will be the 8th market globally ranked by revenues, and that is largely driven by mobile gaming. So one of the interesting things here to pick out is that even though we already discussed, or I already said, that mobile gaming is so large compared to the other two markets, we still think that the opportunity for growth in gaming on mobile is larger than it is for PC and console. And why we think that is well, largely because what we see in other markets that have went through a similar growth path in the past decade is that it's very hard to displace mobile as the platform of choice. Instead, what happens is that the type of games played and the type of games offered on mobile diversify. So I think in the past years, we've already seen it in India with games like PUBG Mobile, prior to the ban now, Free Fire, Mobile Legends become very big games. And those are very core type of experience that, prior to the past few years would have been exclusive to PC mostly, or sometimes console. And now they're also playable on mobile. So rather than shifting platform preferences to PC or console, mobile players are just, well, if they're looking for more in-depth, high-fidelity experience, they're just changing the games that they play. Part of that being, of course, how accessible and how multi-usable a mobile device is, and how it's already owned by so many people, rather as compared to PC and console ownership, which is still rather low. So hence, very optimistic, particularly on mobile, which will become even more dominant in the next couple of years. And to share a different perspective on why we think that is, or how that could be, we also shared some stats about the number of players, which is growing at a similarly rapid rate, from 257 million in 2018 to 407 million by 2023. A bit of explanation: the dark green bars here are the total players, the light green bars are the mobile players. And again, you'll see that India is very much a mobile first country. So this is with overlaps, so some of these mobile players will also play on PC and console, but it is over 90% of the people play first on mobile. And the second thing that I added here, which is what you see towards the bottom of the chart, is the challenge of the Indian gaming market right now. And that's the average annual spend per player, or the monetization. I think most of the people here will be aware that the average spend is very low compared to other markets. In fact, just barely scratches the top 100 if you would rank all countries by the annual average spend on games. But what I also want to pull out from here, that even though that this is a challenge, it's also a positive, because that 4.8 billion forecast on the previous slide might seem very wild, but that still means that people on average would spend only just $1 per month in 2023, which is a lot more achievable if you think it like that. So just by the sheer size of the player population, the potential for India is huge. Now, moving on. As I said, I would discuss some things about the Indian gamer. Before I dive into that, there's two disclaimers that I want to make. Our consumer research, first of all, focuses on the online urban population, or urban online population, which is, of course, in India, in a country like India, very different from the full online population, which is now, through the advances in mobile infrastructure, to the advances in mobile internet and the affordability of it, become pretty much countrywide, or at least very accessible among many places in the country, not just in the big cities. But our research focuses on those big cities. And we also only focus on ages from 10 to 50. And you'll see that in the next couple of slides about some of the preferences that are pretty unique to that demographic. And what I would say is that the majority of revenues right now will come from that group as well. So it is, in my opinion, still very interesting to zoom in on that group. The second disclaimer that I want to make is that even though I'll be sometimes speaking or referring to the Indian gamer or the Indian player as being one type, that is also no longer true. So the idea that there is such a thing as a stereotypic player or gamer or an average gamer, that is no longer really the case. There's actually a diverse set of personas or types of people and how they engage with games, maybe that they view gaming content or owning gaming hardware. All of that determines how people engage with games, and all of this can be very different across different groups. So whenever we look at it like this, take it with the idea in your mind that, okay, there's no such thing as the average gamer, even in any country or in every market. But still, some interesting things to look at, some interesting things to highlight. On this slide, I highlighted the player overlap and the player demographics. When I talk about player overlap, we talk about how many people play exclusively on one device versus how many people play across 2 or 3 devices. And what I found very surprising here is that 81% of the people that we research indicate that they played on all 3 devices, which is kind of surprising if you look back to the mobile first slides that I showed earlier. Now, first of all, keep in mind that this is among the urban online population. But even then, if you compare it with ownership of devices, where PC and console ownership is still rather low, particularly gaming PC ownership, it's surprising. So I did some extra digging, and one of the things that I found, or two of the things I found that will influence this is, first of all, the cultural, let's call it the cultural habit of sharing, and that is very prominent in India, especially compared to maybe some Western markets, is that even though not many people might own a PC or a console, those that do often share them with friends. And I have to say that the bar that we have for what makes a player is rather low. Anyone that's played on a device in the past 6 months would qualify as a player, but it does show the interest in all three platforms. So there's definitely some interest for growth or opportunity for growth there, even outside of mobile. And while we're very optimistic on mobile, it doesn't mean that we're not optimistic on what PC and console gaming can be in India. Second thing to call out here is that the PC and mobile overlap is 10%, while console and mobile overlap is only 2%. And that's rather unique as well. You often find, or we often find, that in other markets, the group that plays console and mobile games is quite large, or quite comparable to the group, if not larger, to the group that plays PC and mobile games. So it does show that there is some history for PC gaming in India as well. Moving over to the right, to the player demographics, what you'll see first at the top is a chart with gender and age. And again, this comes to a point that the stereotypical gamer, that's really an old-fashioned idea. Just 55% of the people or the players in India are male, 45% are female. And of course, there's a large group in that 21 to 35 brackets for both genders. Of course, the average age in India is quite low, so to see that this group is the largest, it probably doesn't surprise anyone. But what is interesting is that the group between 10 and 20 is just as big as the group between 36 and 50. Actually, for both genders, that's quite an interesting finding. Among the people that we surveyed, 77% are full-time employees, which is a remarkably high number as well. Versus just a little bit less for the total online population that includes non-players. So maybe players are a bit more likely to be employed, although it's a very minor difference. 31% still lives with their parents or legal guardians, lives at home. 55% has an average to high income. So just some interesting statistics about the player base that we surveyed. As I said, I really like comparing things to the global average because I think that's how we learn what makes India unique. And the genders is very close to global average. Actually, it skews a bit more, less towards males globally, but hardly worth calling out. And top franchises, there's two things that I find very interesting. First of all, and we'll look into genres a little bit after this, but Call of Duty and PUBG being ranked as the top 3 franchises based on playtime in the last 3 months is very interesting. You don't often find shooters that high in other markets. And again, it just speaks to how successful these type of games have been in India in the past years and how they were really part of breaking open the Indian market in terms of gaming. And a second thing that I found very interesting is that you don't really see it on this chart, but the fact that there's hardly any Nintendo franchises in the top franchises in India, just I don't know if that's underrepresentation or if it just doesn't fit culturally, but it's yeah, Nintendo has work to do. And lastly, two things on this slide that I find very interesting, just because it speaks again to that mobile first idea in India, is looking at playtime per week and spending. Playtime per week, 17% of the mobile players play more than 10 hours per week, which is really remarkable. It's 4% above the global average. And it just shows how mobile gamers are transcending to this core demographic that I spoke about earlier, and how they no longer need to shift to PC and console to find these core experiences. Like mobile games can entertain people easily for more than 10 hours per week, keep them busy. And I think in a similar way, looking at spending is very interesting because it shows that the challenge of India. The first one being that 64% or almost 2/3 of the mobile players don't spend a thing, nothing, which is 10% more than the global average. On the other hand, the people that spend a lot, or big spenders as we would call them, is also 8% compared to 6% for the global average. So 25% more. So there's something here. Like yes, there's a lot of free-to-play spenders, but also the people that do spend tend to spend big a bit more than the global average. So opportunities. And lastly, something that we always like to do is some of the most preferred genres by players, and this is based both on the self-reported data, but also on the top grossing charts over the last years. And there's a couple of things to unpack here. So first of all, generally speaking, gender preferences in India are more likely close to Western markets. So in this chart, I pulled in UK for comparison, than they are to the geographically closer Asian markets. And in this case, I picked China as a prime example, being the largest mobile market by revenues as well. Let's start at the top. Let's start at mobile games. Puzzle being the most popular mobile game, just like in many Western markets, UK being among them. Shows a similarity, but I have to, of course, give a shout out here to the unique game in India. That's probably the first and still one of the biggest mobile successes, Ludo King. Truly unique for the Indian market, and the part of what set the stage for puzzle gaming or even mobile gaming in India. Part of what unlocked mobile gaming for many people that might not have considered gaming before. So puzzle is definitely comparable, but the games people are playing is very different. Second thing to call out here on mobile, India is the only market where sports games are among the top 5 most popular genres. Cricket games being a large part of that. I also think that even though this is not part of our market sizing, that the real money games, real money gambling might have played a part here, because people still associate sports games with that. Not shooter and battle royale should be no surprise, given how popular PUBG was prior to the ban. But Arena Free Fire is now the local build. Fauji is. I saw that it made the top 10 downloads year to date on Google Play in India. So there's a huge appetite, a huge enthusiasm for those type of games. Call of Duty as well, of course, both on console and on mobile. And then fighting games, finally, which is also rather unique. Although compared to these two markets, there's many markets where fighting games are quite popular. Dragon Ball Z being the most popular example there. Moving ahead to racing game, or console genres, most favorite console genres. And again, it shows the fascination with sports games and also racing sports games that is really unrivaled globally. Those type of games are very popular everywhere, but to see them as the most popular, that is quite unique. What is also quite surprising compared to global averages, some of the things that aren't on here, role-playing games among them, they're usually very popular in most markets, but not so much in India. It might be because there's an opportunity there for localization, for recognizing yourself in the stories. Again, I'm personally very excited for the post-mortem by the developers of Raji end of today, which is one of the first locally made, locally developed games that take the Indian cultural narrative, and I think there's an opportunity there. But to see role-playing games not show up in the favorite genres is quite surprising and goes against the global average. Also, mobile games or battle arena like League of Legends, Dota, strategy and simulation games, usually you'll find them among the top genres, but not so much in India. So shout out there. All right, then. That just sums up a little bit on what we know about gaming in India. Of course, we have a lot more statistics, but there's also not that much time. As I discussed before I come to the end of this presentation, I wanted to give some of the perspective that we had, what makes India unique, what are the challenges for the growth in the Indian market, and these all fed into how we came to our forecast and how we came to our understanding of the Indian market. Showing first what are some of the positives, what are some of the things that make India so poised for growth. And I think I can't get away from calling out the first, that it's the fastest growing online population. 278 million people came online for the first time in the past 5 years, so since 2015. And it's home to the second largest online population as of last year. Second largest player base, third largest player base globally. 97% of those players play on mobile first. It is just a huge population and also a huge player population, and obviously that's going to attract interest. And it's the main thing, I guess, why we and many others are very optimistic about the opportunities there. Looking at some of the more specific things that make me very optimistic. This year or last year, I really want to call out the esports activity, and particularly the mobile esports activity. And why we call out esports particularly is because it shows lasting interest, it shows longevity, and it shows also people willing to invest in the space. So prior to the ban, the explosion of PUBG Mobile, but now the popularity of Free Fire and the popularity of Mobile Legends, it's created an Indian esports scene, a boom that is very likely here to stay. Not being gaming got an investment. You have Mobile Premier League, a local organizer that is doing very well. Nazara's esports activities as well. There's just a lot of investment, which is a very good sign. A lot of investment in content creators as well. I know Team Vitality, one of the Western esports orgs, are now employing some content creators in India. So that's a very good sign because it shows lasting development. And even the PC esports scene has a strong grassroots following, mostly by the led by enthusiastic PC cafe owners. And the third thing is that it's a truly global playground. And what I mean here is that, historically, India has very strong cultural ties to the West, among which is the use of English, the proficiency in English as well, which makes it a bit easier for Western or English games and publishers to enter the Indian market. But it also has the geographical proximity to many of the APAC markets. And that truly makes it an opportunity for publishers from all parts of the globe. And that makes it a very competitive, but also a very interesting market, and it's very promising. And all of these players, all of these companies will be attracted to the sheer number of players there. So that's definitely unique. It's definitely a positive. Some of the pitfalls. One of the things whenever I talk about an emerging market like India, is people talking about the need for localization. And of course, that need is there in India as well. But India is a huge country. It's almost a continent. It's a very diverse culture, and it has so many different languages that properly localizing is very challenging. I know Free Fire is done in Hindi translation, and that'll help, but even that doesn't guarantee that everyone can play it and everyone can understand it. So that's definitely a challenge. And the second thing I think came out through my presentation many times, but it's the monetization challenges. So despite all the growth in online population, all the growth in players, 27% is the player-to-player share, which is how we sometimes look at how mature a market is. It's the lowest among all the 33 countries that we do primary research in. And that's just a challenge, as well as the average spend being very low. Part of that is, of course, due to the low player-to-player share. But even with that, people aren't really spending that much on mobile games just yet. And that's a challenge. And the third challenge that I want to call out is proximity to data centers. And I think this is an important one to call out because it can get a vicious cycle. So for the market for mobile games is developing really well, but what you want, or typically what you would see, is that as the market grows, people start more looking towards AAA, competitive games, higher fidelity games. And for that, one of the prerequisites, especially in a world where a lot of the games are downloaded digitally, played digitally, updated digitally, we're talking about 100, 200 gigabyte files. Proximity to data centers can become an issue. Because if players, they have to connect to download, to update, to play these games online, to play versus others at a relatively low latency. And if that doesn't happen, it might drive people away. And the sad thing is that it can become a vicious cycle, because then the big tech that is investing in this doesn't see the engagement that they want immediately, and then doesn't want to invest. But then it drives away players. So this is a pitfall. This is a challenge. It's not something that the gaming community itself can completely solve, but it's one to be aware of. All right, and now I've come to the end of my presentation today. I wanted to leave it with some final words looking ahead. Maybe you've picked up that I haven't spoken much about some of the more hyped trends that we typically speak about when we speak about global games, talking about cloud gaming, talking about subscription, Netflix for games, metaverse. That isn't because I don't believe in these technologies or that I don't believe in these trends, but I simply think that at this point in the growth path for India's games market, it's not quite there yet. It makes much more sense on focusing on some of the challenges that I showed earlier. So the monetization, making sure people have the right connections, data centers, making sure that payment methods work. It's the basics right now that can fuel this amazing growth for the Indian games market. And there's a lot of promising activity. I named a few of them throughout my presentation, but there's much more to speak about. And I'm sure the people that will speak after me will speak about this as well. And as you can hopefully see from this presentation, I'm very excited about the opportunity in India. And I hope after listening today, you are too. So we can now move to the Q&A section.